The CNBC app. Global market news in one place. Customizable sections and personalized alerts. Stocks tracking, interactive charts and market insights all in your hands. Stay connected. Stay informed. Download the CNBC app today.
Very warm welcome to Squawk Box. I'm Steve Sedgwick with Karen Cho, and these are your headlines. President Trump doubles down in the longest presidential address to a joint session of Congress in U.S. history, touting achievements on immigration and government cost-cutting and hinting at more to come on trade.
Tariffs are about making America rich again and making America great again, and it's happening, and it will happen rather quickly. There'll be a little disturbance, but we're okay with that.
Well, the Trump trade fades as tariffs inject new fears into the markets, with the S&P 500 and the Nasdaq both wiping out their post-election gains.
China's National People's Congress warns of unseen changes unseen in a century, as the world's second largest economy targets a growth rate of around 5% amid the prospect of another trade war. Meantime, Germany's fiscal straitjacket is loosened. Chancellor-to-be Friedrich Merz announces major fiscal reforms to boost defense spending and ease the debt brake.
We're counting on the United States of America to stand by our mutual alliance commitments in the future as well. But we also know that the funding for the defence of our country and alliance must now be expanded significantly.
Ladies and gentlemen, I don't often say this, but I think the massive news overnight was in Berlin. There was big news, and we're going to spend a lot of time on it in DC. But there's enormous news on this side of the Atlantic of what the German government in waiting could well be doing. And a lot of it, most of it, is actually a reaction to what Donald Trump has been saying, not just this time, but in Trump 45 in his first administration as well. I will come to that. I will tantalizingly lead that, but you heard a little bit of it in Karen's last headline there. So the president, Mr. Trump, used his first address to a joint session of Congress since his return to the White House to double down on his economic policies, saying tariffs would, quote, make America rich again. A golden era he talked about, didn't he? Speaking in the longest ever speech of its kind. It really was. Trump also repeated his calls for an end to the war in Ukraine and praised the letter from the Ukrainian President Zelensky, expressing a desire for peace and willingness to sign a deal on critical minerals. Jay Gray has more in Washington. Jay, I make it, an hour and 47, something like that. It was a huge speech. Goodness me, where to start, my friend?
Yeah, no, Steve, you're absolutely right. There's never been one longer in the history of this nation. It was contentious, often a wide-ranging speech on a number of topics. It often and also included really pointed jabs at his predecessor, Joe Biden, and the Democratic Party, blaming both for a range of problems while celebrating what President Trump described as the American dream surging bigger and better than ever, thanks, he says, to his efforts and agenda during the first weeks of his second term, and promising more changes on the way. President Trump walks into the House chamber with a raised fist, beginning his address with a bold declaration.
America is back.
He describes his return to the Oval Office as a mandate.
From that moment on, it has been nothing but swift and unrelenting action.
That met with loud protests from Democrats.
Members are directed to uphold and maintain decorum in the House and to cease any further disruptions.
Texas Representative Al Green refusing to sit down and ultimately led out of the Capitol. Democratic lawmakers holding signs wearing pink jackets in yellow and blue in support of Ukraine. Many sitting with recently fired federal employees as the president celebrates his initiative to slash the cost, size, and scope of the federal government, recognizing billionaire Elon Musk for his role in the widespread cuts that cost many their jobs.
I have created the brand new Department of Government Efficiency, DOGE, which is headed by Elon Elon Musk, who is in the gallery tonight.
He defends 25% tariffs taking effect today on imports from Canada and Mexico and doubling the 10% tariff on goods from China, despite significant drops in the markets over the last 2 days amid concerns of a trade war and continuing inflation and price hikes.
Tariffs are about making America rich again and making America great again, and it's happening, and it will happen rather quickly. There'll be a little disturbance.
And he's asking for additional funding from Congress for border security and deportations, promising the lightning pace of change that's marked his return to the White House will continue. Yeah, and another really interesting part of all this, the White House says President Trump will not travel the country promoting the agenda he laid out during his speech tonight. Many presidents do that after their addresses. He did so during his first term. Advisors saying, though, he can be more effective pushing for change from the Oval Office. And again, a key point in all of what he talked about tonight was fast and constant change.
Jay, I really appreciate you staying up so late for us, and I think we have the privilege of listening to you again in 1 hour's time. So I do appreciate it, my friend. Thank you very much indeed for that great coverage. The US Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick says the Trump administration could announce a compromise on tariffs with Mexico and Canada later today. Speaking to Fox News, Fox Business, Lutnick said he thinks the President Trump will, quote, work something out, saying the two countries are offering to do more to address the president's concerns. Well, speaking to this channel yesterday, Lutnick suggested the two countries could face further levies, though, as part of the administration's planned reciprocal tariffs early next month.
Canada and Mexico had an invitation to trade with the amazing economy of the United States of America, and they have abused that invitation, and the president's going to reset that, but that's April 2nd. That's not today. Today's opioids. April 2nd, I'll be here talking to you about how trade policy is going to change, and we're going to make it fair to Americans.
Before I get to our next guest, what's that about abusing that relationship? I'm sure they're just sticking by the rules of the deal that was signed by, who was that president? Who's 45? Oh yeah, that's Trump, wasn't it? Just saying. Right, Amanda Renteria joins us now, former National Policy Director for Hillary Clinton's 2016 presidential campaign, member of President Biden's Hispanic Affairs Commission as well. Amanda, lovely to see you. Look, you come at this from a Democrat point of view, but what did you make of the speech from an objective point of view?
Listen, I think there were some really sweet moments, right? Calling out when we saw him talk about coming back from being held in Russia, and he was the person that brought back an American home. Seeing a 13-year-old boy get an honorary Secret Service post, right? Those were key moments. But the truth is, when you look at his speech, you have to remember he walked into a body, particularly on the Republican side, that has been pummeled with town halls and real people worried about what is happening out there. And so his normal order of business is to try and convince everyone things are great and his leadership is wonderful. And so you did see the normal campaign rhetoric, divisiveness, calling out Elon Musk, calling out Democrats in a negative way, even getting in a little bit of tiff with Senator Warren and blaming Biden. That's pretty normal. There were two things that were a little bit different in this speech, though. Number one is he did amp up this is the time for the tale of the American empire, right? This is going to be the most powerful moment in time. Didn't talk a lot about allies and collaborations and the global community around the world. What he talked about is American power. That was a much stronger intensity than we've seen out of this president, but very in pattern with what we've been seeing in the last 45 days or so. Yeah. The last thing is the places he was provocative were on things that really affect real people, saying, yes, we're going to see some problem, but it's going to be a little distraction, or saying, farmers, you're going to have fun out there. A $28 billion bailout the last time around. Farmers aren't going to have so much fun when that becomes bigger. And then also when you think about what is happening with Medicaid cuts and all these different cuts that are actually out there hurting families. And I want to end with the time he spent on Social Security is really a warning sign to Americans about the fact that they are looking at Social Security for cuts. Amanda. And that, while provocative, is dangerous.
Yeah, I agree with you, by the way, about a lot of what you said, but I thought the DJ Daniels stuff was actually really very, very touching as well, and rightly got applause from both sides of the divide as well. It was a smart speech in many ways. Amanda, I'm looking for new news from the speech as well, and thankfully, there wasn't some draconian news about relationships with allies. Some people have been on the rumour mill talking about a NATO pullout, so thank goodness me that wasn't in there as well. But what was in there, and perhaps this is a bit of a warning sign to potential foes, was that he's going to resurrect the Golden Dome, the Strategic Defence Initiative, which he mentioned that Reagan couldn't carry out because of technology. I think that's fascinating, that building American defences as well. Do you want to go on that line at all?
Listen, I think what we are seeing is we are going to see these provocative American first ideas. And he's very much about his legacy and making sure he's one-upping one of the most popular Republican presidents. And here is a moment he can do that. It can be provocative, it could be different, and it could be, quote, better than the Republican president that everybody talks about in the Republican Party. And so I do see him really pulling that thread. This was a little balloon to see what people thought about it. And I don't think this is the last we're going to hear about that. I also think I was a little concerned about what he said about tariffs. I do think he is a little bit on an island here because Republicans aren't there, businesses aren't there, and he doubled down on saying this is just the beginning of what he's going to do with tariffs and what that means for the global market as well.
Amanda, I want to pick up on that point because the tariff threat caught up with markets in recent trading sessions. Finally, the reality of those tariffs actually coming into force, not just the threat of them. But Trump, as you say, really leaning into that agenda. While the Commerce Secretary Lutnick did indicate that maybe something can be worked out with Canada and Mexico. So is this just Trump using the full weight of the administration, broadcasting a very strong message, but then leaving room for negotiation through other corridors?
There's definitely always room for negotiation because it is Trump. On the other hand, I think he has to be very careful with the game he is playing, or that it seems like it's a game, because what that does do is it adds instability to the markets, and people do begin to wonder whether he's serious about the things he's doing. So he is in a very tight situation, and you're hearing the business community worry about whether or not he's serious or whether he's not serious. The fact that he's even playing with this idea is concerning. I think the other piece that's important to note is the rhetoric around the world. I think the Republican Party really was struggling with his relation, or the way he's building a relationship with Russia. And you have begun to see Republican leaders say, hold on a second, that was maybe a step too far. And so I suspect there was a lot more in that speech until he got some pushback from the Republican Party about how far are you going to go cozying up to folks who are our long-term enemies.
Amanda, I want to extract some intel around the technology side of the announcements last night because I'm at Mobile World Congress in Barcelona. And what we heard was fascinating around the CHIPS Act, that effectively this federal worker purge is impacting those who'd been implementing the CHIPS Act, which was designed to bolster the semiconductor industry stateside. But at the same time, as we talk about that worker purge, which is impacting the CHIPS Act, we know that this week there was $100 billion invested from TSMC, and it felt like the administration was right behind encouraging the Taiwanese company behind that investment. So how are we thinking about how Trump gets things done, whether he's just pushing some of the build out to the private sector here and public companies?
Well, that's exactly what's happening. For Trump, we're consistently seeing he just wants to get it done. And in many ways for him, it doesn't matter where it comes from so long as he can check the box. And we're seeing that again. So it's interesting because on the one hand, when he says American, does he mean you can have private investment from other places, but yet it's still being built in America? Or does he mean America as that empire he was talking about? It is unclear, but what is always true about Trump is he wants a quick headline that shows that he got something done, and he can message it in any way he feels like it as a win. That's what makes it really interesting right now, because it is unclear what it's going to take to get that win, including what we're seeing with Russia and Ukraine, where he's willing to make a deal. Regardless of the deal, he just wants it done and on the to-do list that he accomplished it.
Amanda, can I ask you a different question? What's the strategy for Democrats now? I'm actually wondering what's the strategy from some of those more centrist Republicans. But I'll ask you about the Democrats there. There was the usual jibe at Elizabeth Warren. We all heard that one in there as well. Al Green stormed out early on as well. I'm not sure if that helped the Democrat cause or not. But what's the fight back looking like? Because, of course, we know we're in the foothills already of the midterms as well. Have they got a strategy which is going to be better than it was for the presidential elections?
Well, certainly I hope so. I will say tonight was a real contrast that you saw with Senator Slotkin, who did the response. Younger generation, very simple message, different kind of style from the Midwest, not the sort of bombastic, but just real talk kind of person who in her message centered the middle class again. And I think that is where Democrats are talking about is how do you get back to the basics of what is fundamental to the Democratic Party about building community and that really building from the middle class on out. That's the core message that they're really trying to navigate around. But at the moment, it's very difficult to have that because that's the long term out. So what do you do in the short term? And you are seeing whether it's sort of activism coming from the members of Congress themselves, but really you're seeing it on the streets, you're seeing it in town halls. And that's a way of broadening the base on the ground with Republicans who are willing to move to talk about these chainsaw cuts that you're seeing out of Elon. That is bringing a whole new group of people together on the ground, and that's something to build from.
It is an unbelievably fascinating space. We knew it would be when he got re-elected. Amanda, we do appreciate your context today. Thank you so much indeed for joining us out of Oakland, California. Amanda Renteria, who is the former National Policy Director for Hillary's 2016 presidential campaign, a member of President Biden's Hispanic Affairs Commission. Oh, well, we referred to the markets, and Karen and Amanda were talking about it just now. Oh, my goodness me. Very big moves to the downside from the US. Again, the two-day decline, pretty meaty as well. The Dow falling another 1.6%. The Nasdaq actually clawing back some of the earlier declines, only down 0.4%. Asian indices look like this. Hang Seng, mightily ahead, 2.4% ahead. And the Shanghai Composite on the mainland up 0.4%. Europe this week's fascinating. I'll just give you this one as well. We are down. Yesterday was pretty much a drubbing for the bulls across the market, but it's got a bit of ground to give back. They have had a hell of a rally, certainly on the German market, inspired by some of those big defence names. Take a look at the European futures. They look incredibly positive as well if you are long. I always say that. We're not cheerleaders for the market, but if there's a lot of you short players out there, and short for very good reasons, but the FTSE called up 0.7%, having lost 1.3% yesterday. The DAX lost a lot of ground yesterday, but it has called up 2% today. Karen.
Steve, coming up on the show, China's National People's Congress targets a growth rate of around 5% as it grapples with the new Trump trade landscape. Plus, Germany takes its foot off the brake with the DAX set to accelerate in today's session, riding on the back of the country's historic fiscal reform. And don't miss our conversation with Sandoz CEO Richard Saynor as the pharma firm confirms its midterm outlook. That interview is coming up at 7:15.
China has announced further fiscal stimulus this morning, setting its sights on around 5% GDP growth. It comes as the country's Premier Li Keqiang warned of changes unseen in a century amid a burgeoning trade war. This after the world's second largest economy announced retaliatory tariffs against the US Tuesday and filed a lawsuit against the levies with the World Trade Organization. Also high on the agenda, consumption, as the country looks to stave off the deflationary pressures that have hit the economy in recent months. Well, Sri filed this report from Beijing.
Material degradation in US-China trade relations is overshadowing the National People's Congress. This is the closely watched annual parliamentary gathering here in China that sets economic growth targets for 2025 and also announces fresh policy support. Premier Li Keqiang, however, sticking to the 5% growth target, GDP target for 2025, despite those trade tensions.
The main targets for development this year are projected as follows. GDP growth of around 5%, surveyed urban unemployment rates of around 5.5%, over 12 million new urban jobs, CPI increase of around 2%, growth in personal income in step with economic growth, a basic equilibrium in the balance of payments.
The leadership here in China at the MPC also acknowledging that this is an economy that is mired in deflation and revising the CPI, the consumer price inflation target for 2025, lower to 2% from 3%, and acknowledging the need to spend more and raising the budget deficit, therefore, to 4% of GDP from 3%. A lot of the spending here is being directed at the consumer. At social spending as well is a big cornerstone of this MPC gathering. But then, of course, the big unknown and the big uncertainty is what happens to the export side of the equation if tariff tensions continue to worsen. However, you look at the market action yesterday and today here in the Shanghai markets and the benchmark markets in the mainland, they do seem to be relatively resilient to the tariff headwinds and the threat of an imminent all-out global trade conflict. And that may be a nod to the fact that this is an administration that is getting behind the private sector, that is getting behind the tech sector. We have seen renewed investment sentiment towards China in the wake of the DeepSeek narrative and in the wake of Xi Jinping's meeting and promotion of the tech sector. I'm Sri Jagaraj in Beijing for CNBC.
I think we all know each other by now, and you know that I believe that the stories surrounding Trump and the US economy 90% of the time are dominant in news flow. I don't think that was the case overnight, even though we had this gargantuan speech from Donald Trump. I think the biggest news was way bigger than DC, was in Berlin. Bear with me on this one. The German Chancellor-in-waiting Friedrich Merz has just struck a deal with his expected coalition partner, right? Already potentially struck a deal with the SDP, something that we didn't even think was going to happen for ages, to plough hundreds of billions of euros. I'll say that again. Hundreds of billions of euros. Because this is the Germans, right? They don't want to touch the debt brake for over a decade. They're going to plough hundreds of billions of euros into extra funding, into infrastructure, but also potentially unlimited amounts of extra debt, which will be exempt from fiscal rules, to go into the military. I'm telling you, ladies and gentlemen, if you're not aware of this statement, I think it's huge. Sorry, I've used the Trump word, huge. Under the plans, which will be presented to Parliament next week. Now, next week, that's really important as well. This is the old Bundestag. It's not the new Bundestag yet, so they're still trying to use the old one. That's a manoeuvre to try and basically circle around some of the detractors like the left and the AfD. Anyway, under plans to be presented to the Parliament next week, they will create a 500 billion euro infrastructure fund and reform the country's debt brake rules. As part of the proposals, the two parties agreed to exempt defence spending from the country's strict borrowing rules. And if you don't think this is massive, then you do not know your post-war history of Germany as well. It is very, very interesting. I'm going to get you loads of guests on this one, and we're going to get Annetta as well. The CDU leader, Friedrich Merz, said the country needed to take matters into its own hands when it came to defence.
In view of increasing threats, it's clear to us that Europe, and along with Europe, the Federal Republic of Germany, must now very quickly make very big efforts to strengthen the defence capability of our country and the European continent. We're counting on the United States of America to stand by our mutual alliance commitments in the future as well. But we also know that the funding for the defence of our country and alliance must now be expanded significantly.
In advance of this, we already booked a great guest, actually. Juliana will discuss this with Florian Schuster-Johnson, who is a senior economist at Der Zahnarzt Zukunft. There you go. Later today on Street Science. Tata shares came off early double-digit gains Tuesday, but still closed in the green after reporting better than expected earnings as annual sales surged. The French defence giant said that it expects increased profitability this year, with the CEO Patrice Caine telling Charlotte that it's logical for Europe to prioritise homegrown companies when it comes to defence spending.
But it sounds logical, and it's the case in many, many countries in the world. It's exactly what happens in the US, and we are a US player as well, so we know how it is. US supply their defense equipment systems from US suppliers, and that's normal. Australia, they do the same. UK, they do the same. So why Europe should do differently? If you want to be autonomous, if you want to give a real meaning to the word sovereignty, you need to be independent from third parties and to be as much as possible self-sufficient in this type of capability.
Has Europe wasted time in a way? We know President Macron has been talking about strategic autonomy for many, many years. Are we having now, with President Trump coming back to the White House and the announcements he's making around Ukraine, the electroshock moment, to take again Macron's words, the electroshock moment for Europe to actually jump into action regarding that strategic autonomy and defense autonomy?
Mm-hmm. Well, it's more a question for President Macron or Madame von der Leyen than for the chairman and CEO of Thales. Now, again, it sounds logical for Europe to have its destiny in own hands and to build, if needed, more and more capacity in terms of engineering, R&D, industry in this domain. Now, from, the vision, from the political statement to the reality, we will see if the gap will be closed shortly or not, but it's clearly...
Thank you for listening to Squawk Box Europe Express.
For more market-moving news, you can head to CNBC.com.
Or join us again on the show with Steve Sedgwick, Karen Cho, and myself, Arabile Kumete, weekdays on CNBC.